I'm warning you again. If that child keeps making noise, I will file for eviction. Rules are rules.
The letter came on a Tuesday afternoon, sliding under my door like a snake. I picked it up with shaking hands and read the words that would change everything. Your child creates unbearable noise. Quiet her immediately or face eviction. I must have read that sentence 5 times before it truly sank in. My little girl Emma was in her bedroom, giggling softly as she played with her stuffed animals. That sweet sound, the one I'd prayed to hear again for 18 long months. Someone was calling it a disturbance. They wanted her silent. They had absolutely no idea what silence had already stolen from us. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to take you back 6 months so you can understand why that letter felt like someone had driven a knife straight through my heart. And listen, if this story touches you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that subscribe button. Stories like this need to be heard, especially during this season, when we're all reminded about kindness and compassion. Emma had just turned 7 when we moved into Riverside Gardens. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest apartment building with an HOA that promised family-friendly living in their brochures. After everything we'd been through, that promise meant the world to me. My husband David had been gone for 2 years by then. A car accident took him from us on an ordinary Thursday morning. He'd kissed Emma goodbye, told her he'd see her after school, and then he was just ... gone. No warning, no chance to prepare. Just suddenly, devastatingly gone. What that kind of loss does to a 7-year-old child, well, it's something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. The grief swallowed Emma whole, pulled her down into a darkness I couldn't reach into. For 18 months after her daddy died, my beautiful, chatty little girl didn't speak. Not one single word. Not a cry, not a whisper, not even a whimper when she hurt herself. Complete silence. Now, I'm a therapist by profession. I understand selective mutism triggered by trauma. I know all the psychology, all the treatment approaches, all the theories about patience and time. But let me tell you something, knowing something professionally and living through it as a mother are 2 completely different kinds of hell. I watched my daughter disappear right in front of me. Her eyes, which used to sparkle with curiosity about everything, went hollow. She moved through life like a ghost, this tiny shadow of the bright child she'd been. At home, she communicated only through nods and head shakes. At school, her teachers told me she'd sit perfectly still at her desk, refusing to participate in anything. The other kids stopped trying to include her in their games. Emma became invisible. Every single night, I'd hold her small body against mine and feel her silent sobs shake through both of us. She'd point to pictures of David, tears streaming down her sweet face. And I had no way none to help her express the ocean of grief that was drowning her from the inside out. I tried everything you can imagine. Play therapy, art therapy, music therapy. We saw different counselors, tried different approaches, and changed medications. Nothing, and I mean nothing, broke through that wall of silence she'd built around herself. Here I was, a professional therapist who helped other people's children find their voices, and I couldn't reach my own daughter. The guilt of that failure ate at me every single day. Now, what happened 3 months ago changed everything, and I was hoping you could stick with me here, because this part of the story is where hope finally started breaking through. You know how they say Christmas miracles can happen? Well, ours came in the form of a butterfly. I'd started letting Emma play outside in the small courtyard behind our building. Nothing special out there, just a little garden with some flowers and a wooden bench. But Emma seemed drawn to that spot. She'd sit for hours just watching butterflies, touching flower petals, existing in her own silent world. One warm afternoon in September, I heard something that made me freeze in place. A sound so small, so fragile, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Butterfly. I spun around so fast I nearly fell over. Emma was standing there with her arm outstretched, and a beautiful monarch butterfly had landed right on her tiny finger. Her lips were moving. Butterfly, she whispered again. Her voice sounded rusty, uncertain, like she'd forgotten how to use it. I dropped to my knees, right there in the dirt, tears blinding me so badly, I could barely see her face. Yes, baby, yes, that's a butterfly. It's so pretty, pretty, Emma repeated. And then she looked at me with those enormous brown eyes, David's eyes, and she smiled. From that moment on, slowly, painfully, slowly words started returning to my daughter. They came in little trickles at first, single words, then short phrases. Her voice stayed soft and hesitant, like she was testing whether the world was safe enough to trust with her sounds again. Then, about 3 weeks before that awful complaint letter showed up, something miraculous happened. We were snuggled up on the couch reading a silly book together, one of those ridiculous stories with talking animals, and Emma laughed. A real, genuine, beautiful laugh that filled every corner of our little apartment with life and light. I started crying immediately. I couldn't help it. I held her tight and thanked God and the universe and every force I could think of for giving me back this piece of my daughter. After that, the laughter came more and more. Emma would giggle at cartoons, chuckle at jokes I told her, and even playfully shriek when I tickled her during bath time. Every single sound was a victory, a battle won against the trauma that had tried to steal her voice forever. Her laughter wasn't loud. It wasn't disruptive or constant. It was just the sound of a child healing, of joy, slowly returning to a little girl who'd forgotten what happiness felt like. But apparently, to someone in our building, my daughter's healing was a problem that needed to be solved. I stood in that hallway reading the complaint over and over, feeling rage and heartbreak fighting for space in my chest. Who would do this? What kind of person hears a child's laughter and decides it's something that needs to be eliminated? The HOA board signed the letter, but I knew someone specific had filed the actual complaint. In a building with only 12 units, it wouldn't be hard to figure out who. That evening, after I'd tucked Emma into bed and kissed her forehead, I decided to investigate. I started with our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She was this sweet, elderly woman who always smiled and waved at Emma when she saw us. A noise complaint about Emma. Mrs. Rodriguez looked genuinely shocked. That sweet child. No, I love hearing her play. It reminds me of when my grandchildren come to visit. Who on earth would complain about that? She didn't know for certain, but she mentioned something interesting. Karen Morrison from Unit 3A directly below us had been acting strange lately. She cornered me in the hallway last week. Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, leaning in close. She asked me if I was disturbed by the constant noise from above your apartment. I told her honestly that I don't hear anything unusual. She seemed angry about that, like she wanted me to agree with her. Karen Morrison. I knew exactly who she was. Now listen, what I discovered about Karen Morrison is going to shock you, but I was hoping you could stay with me because this story takes a turn that none of us saw coming. And as we head into this Christmas season, it's a reminder that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are fighting battles we know nothing about. Karen was probably in her mid-50s, always dressed like she was heading to some fancy country club. Her hair was styled perfectly, never a strand out of place. Her lips never curved into a smile. She drove a luxury Mercedes despite this being a very modest apartment complex. She wore designer clothes and carried herself like she was doing everyone a favor by living here. When we first moved in, I'd tried to be friendly. I'm a people person by nature, it comes with being a therapist. But Karen had looked at Emma and me with such cold dismissal, such obvious contempt, that I'd stopped trying pretty quickly. The next morning, I received a second notice. This one was even more aggressive, more threatening. Second noise violation. The child must be controlled immediately. If disturbances continue, formal HOA disciplinary proceedings will begin, including potential lease termination. My hands shook as I read those words. Lease termination. Over a child's laughter. I called the HOA management office right away. The property manager was a timid man named Robert, who always seemed nervous about everything. Ms. Chen, he said, his voice apologetic but firm. I'm just enforcing the complaints we receive. Mrs. Morrison has filed multiple reports about excessive noise from your unit. My daughter giggles while she plays with her toys, I said, trying desperately to keep my voice steady and professional. That's not excessive noise. That's a child existing in her own home. Mrs. Morrison claims the noise is constant and disruptive. She's actually threatened to sue the HOA if we don't take action. So you're to threaten to evict a single mother and her 7-year-old daughter over laughter. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. I'm sorry, Miss Chen. My hands are tied. Please try to keep noise levels down. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen watching Emma color peacefully at the table, humming softly to herself. This child, who'd been silent for 18 devastating months, was now being told she was too loud. The cruelty of it made me physically sick to my stomach. That afternoon, I decided to confront Karen Morrison directly. I found her in the parking lot, loading shopping bags into her Mercedes. When she saw me approaching, her face tightened into a mask of displeasure. Mrs. Morrison, I said, keeping my voice as calm and professional as possible. I received the noise complaints. I'd really like to talk about this situation. There's nothing to discuss, she said coldly, not even looking at me. Your child is disruptive. This is supposed to be a peaceful building, and some of us have the right to quiet enjoyment of our homes. My daughter is 7 years old. She plays in our apartment during normal, reasonable hours. She's not having parties or screaming at midnight. She's just being a child. Karen finally looked directly at me, and the contempt in her eyes was absolutely shocking. I don't care about your excuses. I pay good money to live here, and I shouldn't have to listen to constant shrieking and stomping above my head. Control your child, or move somewhere more appropriate for people like you. Something cracked in my chest. More appropriate. This is an apartment building. Children live in apartment buildings. Not in my experience of quality living, she snapped. Some of us chose not to have children precisely because we value peace. I shouldn't be forced to suffer because of your choices. The way she said your choices like having a daughter was some selfish inconvenience I'd inflicted on the world made my blood run cold. My daughter lost her father 2 years ago, I said quietly, forcing the words out. She didn't speak for 18 months because of the trauma. The sound you're complaining about, that's her healing. That's her learning to be a child again. Karen's expression didn't change. No sympathy. No flicker of recognition about the pain behind my words. Nothing. That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem. Quiet down, or face the consequences. She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing there shaking, with a mixture of anger and complete disbelief. What happened next pushed me to my absolute breaking point, and I had to make a choice. Stay with me here, because this Christmas season, this story is a powerful reminder about fighting for what matters most, even when the whole world seems stacked against you. That night, I lay next to Emma as she drifted off to sleep. She'd had such a good day. She'd played with her toys, watched her favorite show, and laughed when our cat knocked over a plant. Normal, beautiful, ordinary childhood moments. And tomorrow, I was supposed to what? Tell her to be quiet. Explain that her happiness was bothering someone. I thought about my work as a therapist. How many children had I helped find their voices over the years? How many parents had I counseled about creating safe spaces where kids could express their emotions freely? And now I was being told to silence my own daughter. The next day, another letter arrived. This one included a schedule. Quiet hours are now enforced from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. Any noise disturbances during daytime hours must not exceed normal conversation levels. Normal conversation levels. For a 7-year-old child playing in her own home, I made a decision right then and there. I wasn't going to let Karen Morrison steal Emma's healing. Not after how hard we'd both fought to get here. I started documenting absolutely everything. I downloaded a decibel meter app on my phone and began measuring Emma's play sounds. During her loudest moments, when she was laughing hard or playing an active game, the noise level registered between 60 and 70 decibels. That's equivalent to normal conversation or background music in a restaurant. Certainly not disruptive by any reasonable standard. I recorded times and activities in a detailed log. 3:15 p.m. Emma playing with dolls. Occasional soft laughter. 4 p.m. Emma is watching cartoons, laughing at the funny parts. 6:30 p.m. Emma and I are playing a board game together, talking and laughing. Nothing was excessive. Nothing was outside the bounds of normal childhood behavior. But the complaints kept coming anyway, each one more threatening than the last. Then, on a Saturday morning, everything exploded. Emma was playing in the courtyard garden, her favorite spot, where she'd spoken her first word after all that silence. She was chasing butterflies, giggling, and talking to herself about which flowers were the prettiest. I sat on the bench watching her, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. Karen Morrison appeared from the building entrance, walking straight toward us with a clear purpose in her stride. "This needs to stop," she said sharply, standing over me like some judge. I stood up slowly, deliberately positioning myself between her and Emma. "Excuse me, your daughter. This constant noise, it's completely unacceptable." Emma had stopped playing, sensing the tension in the air. She moved closer to me, her small hand finding mine. I felt her starting to shrink, to go quiet again, and something fierce and protective roared to life inside me. "My daughter is playing in a common area during the middle of the day," I said, my voice steel. "She has every right to be here. She's screaming like a wild animal. Some of us are trying to enjoy our Saturday in peace." Emma's hand tightened around mine. I looked down and saw fear creeping into her eyes, that awful, familiar look that reminded me of those dark months when she'd stopped speaking entirely. "She's laughing," I said, and my voice cracked despite my effort to stay controlled. "She's a little girl, playing outside. If you can't handle the sound of a child being happy, maybe you're the one who needs to move somewhere more appropriate, like a retirement community where children aren't allowed." Karen's face flushed deep red with rage. "How dare you? How dare I?" The words exploded from me. "How dare you? Do you have any idea what this child has been through? Do you care at all that you're trying to silence a trauma survivor who just learned to use her voice again?" "I don't care about your sob story," Karen hissed. "I care about my quality of life." And there it was. The truth lay bare. This wasn't about noise levels, or disruption, or reasonable complaints. This was about a bitter, entitled woman who valued her own comfort over a child's well-being. "Come on, Emma," I said, turning away from Karen. "Let's go inside." As we walked away, Karen called out behind us. "The HOA board meeting is Tuesday night. I'm formally requesting your eviction. We'll see what the board thinks about tenants who refuse to comply with reasonable rules." Emma was quiet the rest of that day. Not the old trauma-silent quiet, but a scared quiet that broke my heart all over again. That night, she whispered to me, "Mommy, are we in trouble? Is that lady mad because I laughed?" I pulled her into my arms, feeling my heart shatter into pieces. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. Not one single thing. That lady is having a hard time understanding that children need to laugh and play. But that's her problem, not yours." "Should I be quieter?" Emma asked in the smallest voice. "No," I said firmly, even as tears ran down my face. "No, sweetheart. You never have to be quiet. You laugh whenever you feel like laughing. Promise me. Promise," she whispered. But I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. The HOA board meeting was my last chance to save our home, and what happened there changed everything. But before I tell you about that night, I want to remind you that if this story is touching your heart this Christmas season, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. The HOA board meeting was held in a cramped community room in the building's office. When I arrived Tuesday evening, Karen Morrison was already there, sitting with perfect posture, looking satisfied and confident. There were 5 board members, 3 retirees, a middle-aged couple, and Robert, the nervous property manager, who ran the meetings. I recognized most of them from various building events. We're here to discuss the ongoing noise complaint from Unit 3A. Regarding Unit 7B, Robert began, his voice shaky. Mrs. Morrison has filed 7 formal complaints in the past 3 weeks. Mrs. Chen is here to respond. Karen went first, presenting her case like she was a prosecutor in a courtroom. She'd kept a detailed log of every sound she claimed to hear from my apartment. Constant running, jumping, screaming, loud television at all hours. Complete disruption of her peace. It was a list of exaggerations and outright lies. Emma didn't run around constantly. She didn't jump. She wasn't loud at unusual hours. But Karen presented everything with such confidence, such conviction, that I saw some of the board members nodding along with her version of events. Children should be taught to behave appropriately in shared living spaces, Karen concluded. This mother clearly isn't capable of controlling her child. For the well-being of all residents, I'm requesting that their lease be terminated. The casual cruelty of calling for our eviction, the dismissive way she referred to Emma as an uncontrolled problem, made my blood boil. Then it was my turn. I pulled out my phone and opened my documentation. For the past 3 weeks, I've been measuring decibel levels in my apartment during Emma's playtime. I have time-stamped recordings showing that noise levels consistently stay between 60 and 70 decibels, equivalent to normal conversation. I also have video footage of Emma playing quietly with toys, watching television at a reasonable volume, and engaging in completely normal childhood activities. I showed them the evidence. Some board members leaned forward, genuinely interested. But this isn't really about noise levels, I continued, feeling my professional training kick in that ability to read a room, to understand what people need to hear. This is about whether a child has the right to exist comfortably in her own home. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. 3 years ago, my husband died in a car accident. My daughter Emma was only 5 years old. The trauma of losing her father caused her to stop speaking completely. For 18 months, I watched my child disappear into silence. She didn't talk. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She couldn't express her pain or her grief or anything she was feeling inside. The room had gone completely quiet. One of the board members, an older woman named Helen, had tears forming in her eyes. As a child therapist, I tried everything to help her. But trauma doesn't follow a schedule or respond neatly to treatment plans. Emma stayed silent until 3 months ago, when something finally broke through, and she started finding her voice again. 2 months ago, she laughed for the first time since her father died. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. The sounds Mrs. Morrison is complaining about a child's laughter, a child talking to herself while playing, a child watching cartoons and reacting to them. Those are the sounds of my daughter healing. Those are the sounds of childhood returning to a little girl who lost her way too soon. Karen made a dismissive noise. That's very touching, but it doesn't give her carte blanche to disturb other residents. I turned to look at her directly. What disturbs you isn't the noise. Be honest. What disturbs you is that a child exists above you. What disturbs you is that someone else's life doesn't revolve around your comfort. How dare— I'm not finished, I said, and there was enough steel in my voice that she actually stopped. You mentioned that you chose not to have children because you value peace. That's absolutely your right. But this is a residential apartment building, not a luxury adults-only resort. Families live here. Children live here. And those children have rights too. I looked around at the board members. I'm asking you to consider what message you're sending if you punish a 7-year-old girl for laughing in her own home. I'm asking you to consider whether accommodating one person's extreme need for silence is more important than protecting a child's right to heal and grow. Helen, the older woman with tears in her eyes, spoke up. I live 2 units down from you, Mrs. Chen. I've never heard excessive noise from your apartment. I have heard Emma playing sometimes, and honestly, it makes me smile. It reminds me of when my own kids were young. Another board member, a man named George, nodded vigorously. I've got grandkids. They're loud sometimes. That's just kids being kids. That's normal. Karen's face was turning red. This is ridiculous. The bylaws clearly state that residents shouldn't create excessive disturbances. Robert interrupted, finding some backbone for the first time. But they also recognize reasonable use of units for residential purposes. Children playing quietly in their homes during daytime hours is a reasonable use. Playing quietly. Karen's voice rose. Have you actually heard the shrieking? The constant stomping? I've personally reviewed the decibel measurements Mrs. Chen provided, Robert said carefully. They don't indicate excessive noise by any standard definition. Additionally, we've reached out to other nearby residents. No one else has complained about Unit 7B, because they're too polite to say anything, Karen insisted. Or because there's actually no problem, Helen said firmly. Karen, I'm going to be honest with you. This seems less like a legitimate noise complaint and more like a personal issue with having a child in the building. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Karen stood up abruptly. This is absolutely outrageous. I pay my fees. I follow the rules. And I'm being told I have to suffer because this woman won't control her child. No one's suffering, George said, sounding tired. A kid is playing upstairs. That's apartment living. That's normal life. Not acceptable, Karen said coldly. She looked directly at me, her eyes full of venom. If this board won't do anything, I'll take legal action. I'll sue for breach of quiet enjoyment. I'll make sure you regret ignoring my complaints. The threat hung in the air like poison. But Helen stood up, drawing herself to her full height. Mrs. Morrison, if you pursue legal action against Mrs. Chen over a child playing normally in her home, I'll personally testify on her behalf. And I suspect every other parent in this building will too. As will I, George added immediately. Karen looked around the room, seeing clearly that she'd lost this battle. The fury on her face was actually frightening. Fine, she spat, but don't expect me just to accept this. I'll be documenting every single disturbance. And when your precious child disrupts me one too many times, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of mother you really are. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook in its frame. The room exhaled collectively. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that, Helen said kindly, coming over to me. Some people they forget that communities include all kinds of people, including children. Robert cleared his throat. Officially, the board finds no violation of noise policies by Unit 7B. The complaints are dismissed. Mrs. Chen, you and Emma are welcome to continue living here without any restrictions beyond our standard policies. I thanked them, relief flooding through my entire body. But as I walked back to my apartment that night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted and sad. What Karen Morrison did next shocked everyone in the building, and the harassment got so bad that I nearly gave up. But then something happened that none of us expected, especially during this time of year, when we're all thinking about forgiveness and second chances. Over the next few weeks, things got worse before they got better. Karen Morrison became like a one-woman campaign of harassment. She would time our movements and appear whenever Emma and I were in common areas, glaring at us, making pointed comments about noise and disruption. She started leaving printed articles under our door about teaching children proper behavior and respecting shared spaces. She filed complaints with the city about everything she could think of: noise violations, parking issues, even claiming I was running an illegal business from my apartment because I occasionally met with therapy clients virtually, which was completely legal. Every single complaint was investigated and dismissed. But it was absolutely wearing me down. I started feeling anxious every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, wondering if it was Karen coming to harass us again. Emma noticed my tension. Is the angry lady still mad at us? She asked one evening, her voice small. Yes, honey, but she's wrong to be mad. You remember that, okay? You're not doing anything wrong. But I could see Emma starting to monitor herself again. She'd lower her voice when she played. She'd look up nervously if she laughed too loudly. The beautiful, hard-won spontaneity she'd regained was being slowly stolen by one bitter woman's campaign of cruelty. I felt helpless rage every time I saw Emma shrink herself to avoid Karen's anger. This was exactly the opposite of what she needed. Emma had spent 18 months locked in traumatic silence. She needed to know that the world was safe enough for her voice, for her joy, for her very existence. Then one afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping to find Karen Morrison standing right at our door, waiting for me. "We need to talk," she said coldly. "I don't think there's anything left to discuss," I replied, moving past her to unlock my door. "I'm offering you a solution," she continued. "I'll drop all complaints and stop pursuing this issue if you agree to move to a first-floor unit. The building has one available right now." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want us to move because you can't handle normal apartment living? I'm offering you a compromise. Take it, or I'll make your life hell until you leave anyway." The threat was crystal clear, and honestly, I was so tired, so worn down. But then Emma appeared in the doorway behind me, and I saw her face. She looked scared and small, and something inside me just snapped. "No," I said firmly. "We're not moving. Emma has a right to live in her home without being bullied, and I'm done accommodating your unreasonable demands." Karen's face twisted with fury. "You'll regret this, maybe," I said. "But I'd regret even more teaching my daughter that we should give in to bullies who try to intimidate us." I took Emma's hand, and we walked inside, closing the door on Karen's anger. That night, I made a crucial decision. I was done being reactive. It was time to be proactive and actually fight back. The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with my supervisor at the therapy clinic, where I worked part-time. I told her everything that had been happening, every detail of the harassment. "Sarah," she said carefully, "what Karen Morrison is doing could actually be considered harassment, especially given Emma's vulnerable psychological state. Have you thought about documenting this formally? You mean for legal action? Possibly. But also, you're a mandated reporter and a mental health professional. If someone's actions are actively harming a child's psychological well-being, you have options available to you." She was absolutely right. I'd been so caught up in just surviving the harassment day by day that I hadn't thought strategically about how actually to stop it. I started keeping a detailed, professional log of every single interaction with Karen, dates, times, exactly what was said, and how Emma reacted emotionally. I documented Emma's increased anxiety, her renewed hesitancy to speak freely, and her nervousness in common areas of the building. I also reached out to other parents in the building to see if I was alone in this. It turned out Karen had been complaining about children in general for years. She'd harassed the family that lived below her before we moved in. She'd filed complaints about children playing in the courtyard, children in the parking lot, children anywhere she encountered them. There was a clear pattern of behavior, and it wasn't really about noise at all. It was about a woman who felt entitled to live in a child-free environment and was willing to make families absolutely miserable to get what she wanted. Armed with all this information, I requested another formal meeting with the HOA board. "Mrs. Morrison's behavior constitutes harassment," I explained, presenting my comprehensive documentation. "She's not simply filing noise complaints anymore. She's engaging in a targeted campaign to drive my family out of this building. She's threatened me directly multiple times, and her actions are causing measurable psychological harm to my daughter." I showed them the detailed timeline of Karen's escalating behavior. I showed them statements from other families she'd harassed over the years. I showed them documentation from Emma's therapist about the regression in her emotional progress. This child was making remarkable progress in her recovery from severe trauma, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. She was learning to trust the world again, to believe that expressing herself was safe. Karen Morrison's harassment is systematically undoing that progress. Emma is becoming anxious and withdrawn again. She's starting to silence herself to avoid conflict. Helen looked genuinely distressed. This is terrible. I had no idea it had gotten this bad. What exactly do you want the board to do? Robert asked. I want a formal cease and desist order issued against Mrs. Morrison regarding my family. No more complaints unless there's actual documented evidence of excessive noise. No more confrontations in common areas. No more harassment of any kind. And I want it formally documented that if she violates this order, she'll face real consequences, including potential lease termination. That's a very serious step, one of the other board members said hesitantly. She threatened to make my life hell until I moved, I said bluntly. She's systematically harassing a single mother and a traumatized child. How is protecting us from that not worth taking seriously? There was heavy silence in the room. Then Helen spoke up. I move that we issue a formal cease and desist order to Karen Morrison regarding her interactions with Mrs. Chen and her daughter. Any further harassment will result in immediate board action, up to and including lease termination. Seconded, George said immediately. The vote was unanimous. The cease and desist letter was delivered to Karen Morrison that very afternoon. I expected more anger, more threats, maybe even escalation of the harassment. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. What happened next left me absolutely speechless. 2 days after that letter was delivered, Karen Morrison knocked on my door, and what she told me changed everything I thought I knew. This is the part of the story that reminds me why this Christmas season is so special, because even the most broken hearts can sometimes find healing. 2 days later, I received a knock on my door. When I opened it, Karen Morrison stood there, but she looked completely different, deflated somehow, older, less put together than I'd ever seen her. I need to talk to you, she said quietly. Every instinct I had told me to slam the door in her face, but something in her expression made me pause. Okay, I said carefully, but Emma's home, so I know. Actually, I wanted to apologize to her, too. If you'll allow it. I was completely shocked. Apologize. May I come in? Just for a moment, please. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Emma was in her room, and I hadn't called her out yet. Karen stood in my small living room, looking uncomfortable and lost, like she didn't quite know what to do with herself. I received the cease and desist letter, she said finally, and I'd spent 2 days thinking about everything that's happened, about what the board said, about what you said. She sat down heavily on my couch, looking older than her years. I had a daughter once. My breath caught in my throat. This was not at all what I'd expected to hear. Her name was Lily. She died when she was 8 years old. Leukemia. Karen's voice was flat, emotionless in that particular way of someone who's told this story too many times, who's built walls around the pain. That was 30 years ago. I never had another child after that. Never wanted to risk that kind of pain again. I'm so sorry, I said quietly, and I genuinely meant it. After Lily died, I couldn't stand being around children. Any children. Every laugh reminded me of her laugh. Every child's voice was her voice echoing back to me. I built my entire life around avoiding that pain, choosing child-free places to live. Working from home, creating this silent environment where I wouldn't be constantly reminded of what I'd lost. She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet with tears. When you moved in above me, and I started hearing Emma, her voice, her laughter, it was like someone had torn open a wound I'd spent 3 decades trying to heal. It physically hurt to hear it, so I lashed out. I tried to make it stop because I couldn't handle the pain. Tears were streaming down her face now. But when I got that cease and desist letter, when I read all the documentation you'd provided about Emma's trauma and her recovery progress, I realized something horrible. I've been so focused on protecting myself from my own grief that I tried to steal another child's healing. I tried to silence a little girl because her joy reminded me of everything I'd lost. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. That's unforgivable. I see that now. I see what I've done. I sat down across from her, my own eyes filling with tears. The complexity of pain, the way it can twist us, make us cruel, turn our own suffering into weapons we use against others. It was absolutely heartbreaking to witness. Your daughter, I said gently. Would she want you to hurt other children just to avoid your own pain? Karen shook her head slowly. No. Lily was the kindest child. She loved making people laugh, loved bringing joy to everyone around her. She would be so ashamed of what I've done. We sat in silence for a long moment, two mothers connected by grief and loss. Then, I called Emma out of her room. She came cautiously, seeing Karen and immediately moving close to me for protection. Karen looked at my daughter, and fresh tears fell down her cheeks. Emma, she said softly, her voice breaking. I need to tell you something very important. I've been very mean to you and your mother. I complained about your laughter and tried to make you feel like you had to be quiet all the time. That was so wrong. You have every right to laugh and play, and be happy. Emma watched her warily, not quite trusting yet. I was mean to you, because I was very sad inside, Karen continued. I lost someone I loved very much a long time ago, and hearing you laugh reminded me of her. But that's not your fault at all, and it's not fair for me to be angry at you for being happy. She pulled something from her purse, a small framed photograph. This is my daughter, Lily. She loved to laugh, just like you do. And I think she would have wanted me to protect other children's laughter, not try to take it away. Emma looked at the photo carefully, then up at me. I nodded encouragingly. I'm sorry, Emma said quietly, and my heart broke at her instinct to apologize even when she'd done nothing wrong. No, sweetheart, Karen said quickly, more tears falling. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. I'm the one who's sorry. Will you forgive me? Emma thought about it with that serious, careful way children have when they're considering something important. Then she said something that made both Karen and me start crying. My daddy died too. It makes me really sad sometimes. Karen's face crumpled. I know, honey. I know it does. But Mommy says we have to keep living, even when we're sad. She says that's what Daddy would want us to do. Your mommy is very, very wise, Karen said through her tears. And you're such a brave little girl. Emma considered this for another moment, then walked over and hugged Karen. It was completely spontaneous, and pure, and so typical of children, their incredible ability to forgive, to offer comfort even to those who've hurt them. Karen hugged her back, sobbing quietly, and I witnessed 30 years of buried grief finally being acknowledged and released. Karen Morrison didn't become a completely different person overnight. She was still reserved, still private, still carried her grief like a heavy coat she couldn't quite take off. But she stopped the harassment immediately. More than that, she started making small gestures of reconciliation that touched my heart. She brought Emma a butterfly garden kit for the courtyard, so you can watch them up close, she explained with a small, sad smile. She apologized formally to the HOA board and withdrew every single complaint she'd filed. She even occasionally, when Emma was playing in the courtyard, would sit on a nearby bench and watch with that bittersweet expression on her face, remembering her own daughter while witnessing mine heal. One afternoon, Emma asked her about Lily. Karen told her stories about how Lily loved drawing pictures of animals, how she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, and how she made everyone laugh even when she was very sick. She sounds like she was really nice, Emma said thoughtfully. She was, Karen agreed. She would have liked you very much. It wasn't exactly a friendship that developed between them, but it was something meaningful and understanding between two people who'd both lost someone they loved deeply, who both knew what it meant to carry grief through every single day. Emma's laughter returned fully over the following weeks. The hesitancy disappeared completely. She stopped monitoring herself, stopped checking to see if she was being too loud. She just existed, loud and quiet, joyful and sad, all the messy, beautiful parts of being a child. And I learned something profound about pain and how it moves through the world, how it spreads if we're not careful. Karen's cruelty hadn't come from evil or malice, but from unprocessed grief turned outward. weaponized against an innocent child. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but understanding it helped me find compassion. 6 months later, something beautiful had grown from all that pain and conflict. And as we celebrate this Christmas season, this ending reminds us that healing is possible, even in the most broken situations. 6 months after that terrible complaint letter first arrived, Emma and I still lived in Unit 7B. The apartment felt like home now, really deeply home. Karen had moved to a different unit in the building. Not forced out, but choosing on her own to relocate to a first-floor corner apartment. More privacy, she explained to me, but still close enough to hear when Emma finds butterflies in the courtyard. On Emma's 8th birthday, Karen gave her a special gift, a journal that had belonged to Lily. She loved writing down her thoughts and feelings, Karen explained, her voice thick with emotion. Maybe you'd like to write down yours too. Emma treasured that journal. She filled it with her drawings, her thoughts, her memories of David, all the feelings she was learning to express. One evening, she read me something she'd written, and I had to fight back tears. I used to be really quiet because I was so sad about Daddy. Now I can be loud because I'm happy again. Mommy says it's okay to be both sad and happy at the same time. Mrs. Karen says her daughter Lily used to be loud too, and she misses hearing that. So when I laugh really hard, maybe Lily can hear it wherever she is and know that laughing is still happening in the world. I held my daughter close, tears streaming down my face, thinking about the long, difficult journey from silence to sound, from grief to healing, from fear to trust. The HOA never sent another complaint. Other families in the building made a point of telling Emma they loved hearing her play. Children need to know they're welcome in the world, Helen told me one day. I returned to my work as a therapist with renewed passion and understanding. I'd lived the parent side of childhood trauma now, understood viscerally what my clients' families went through every single day. It made me so much better at what I did. And Ime beautiful, brave Emma, she thrived. Her voice grew stronger, more confident with each passing week. She made friends at school, joined the drama club, and absolutely loved performing. She talked about her father openly now, keeping his memory alive through stories and laughter. She still played in the courtyard almost every day, still chased butterflies, still laughed that beautiful, hard-won laugh that had caused so much trouble. And sometimes Karen Morrison would sit on her bench and watch, a soft smile on her weathered face, listening to sounds that both hurt and healed her in equal measure. Because that's what real healing is, I've learned. It's not the absence of pain. It's not forgetting what hurt us. It's the ability to exist alongside the pain, to let joy back in even when grief remains, to make space for laughter without forgetting why we cried. Emma taught me that a 7-year-old girl who'd been through absolute hell and back, who'd lost her voice and found it again, who laughed despite every reason not to. Her laughter was never just noise. It was defiance against trauma. It was hope surviving. It was a child reclaiming her childhood, one giggle at a time. And nobody, no HOA Karen, no cease and desist letter, no amount of bitterness or buried grief was ever going to take that away from her again. Because I'm her mother, and I'd burn the entire world down before I'd let my daughter be silenced again. But in the end, I didn't need to burn anything down. Sometimes, even the most broken people can learn to love the sound of healing, even when it sounds like a child's laughter. Even when it reminds them of everything they've lost and everything that remains worth living for. This Christmas season, I'm reminded that healing comes in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it sounds like laughter. Sometimes it looks like forgiveness. Sometimes it means to grieving mothers finding understanding in their shared pain. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about hope, healing, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. And remember, never let anyone silence your joy. Never let anyone steal your voice. You have every right to exist fully, loudly, and authentically in this world. Merry Christmas to all of you, and may your homes be filled with the beautiful sound of laughter and love.